Well, good evening. This is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Nice to be back with you all after a week layoff. I was up in New York participating in a conference, a leftist conference, if you can believe that, because we're often participating in conservative conferences like the CPAC conference, but this was a leftist conference. And I was part of a panel that talked about left right participation coalitions and so forth in with respect to U.S. foreign policy, the anti-imperialist, anti-interventionist, militarist foreign policy that characterizes the United States. And it was great. We had liberals on there, ardent liberals, and we had a conservative, and then I was a sole libertarian. But it was really a nice discussion. We ended up putting it on our website. It's in one of the email updates from last week if you'd like to access it. I think it was a pretty interesting discussion. No, I'm sorry. I'm thinking about something else. Our economic liberty lecture series. That lecture has not panel has still not been posted. So we're waiting for them to post it, and then we'll put it in our email update. But what I want to talk to you about is a development, a fascinating development in this area of foreign policy, the empire, militarism, and it actually just exemplifies everything that's going on with this pro-empire, pro-interventionist, national security state policy that we've had, oh gosh, since at least World War II. I mean, we've all grown up under this system, right? We're born in this system of the national security state, the empire, troops everywhere, all over the world, the invasions, the occupations, the assassination of foreign rulers and foreigners in general. It used to be justified under the communist threat that the communists were coming to get us, and then when that dissolved with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the dismantling of the Soviet Union, it took them a while. They were talking about rogue states and fighting the war on drugs and so forth, but it took them a while. But with 9/11, they said, oh, wait, we've got a new enemy, the war on terrorism, so you don't need to dismantle the national security state. And of course, very few people question this thing because they've been born and raised under it. They can't imagine life without it. I mean, it's much like, people in Russia that couldn't imagine life without central planning and socialism because they'd never experienced it. And that's the problem we have here, not only with respect to the warfare state, but also with respect to the welfare state. I mean, we've all been born and raised under Social Security. Um, Many people have been born and raised under Medicare and Medicaid, and the regulated economy, the managed economy, the president running as job creator in chief, the centrally managed economy, the presidentially managed economy. I mean, we've all been born and raised in it, so it's like, how do you imagine life without it? Well, that's what I want to do tonight. I want to talk to you about, an example of this national security state, military-industrial complex that President Eisenhower warned would be a threat to our democratic processes, and just show you how corrupt, how evil, how immoral, how contrary to the founding principles of this country this whole system is. And then to continue to raise people's vision, which is what we do at the Future of Freedom Foundation, to a higher level. Not just, oh gosh, how do we get out of Afghanistan? Oh, well, how do we manage our big, embassy in Iraq after occupying the country for 10 years? And, how do we lower the rate of increase on the military budget? No, raising people's vision to a higher level, and that is the restoration of a constitutionally limited republic, a dismantling of the military empire, a ditching of all the militarism, the wars of aggression, this notion that we've got to protect the world, from chaos and controversy, and maintain the peace and stability of the world's policemen. I mean, this is just garbage. I mean, it's absolute garbage. And of course, then there's the blowback, the retaliation for all this that they then use as the excuse for taking away our freedoms here at home. And that's what the body searches at the airport and the Patriot Act and the enemy combatant doctrine and the assassination of Americans. That's what that's all about, to protect us from the people that they're making mad over there with their empire foreign policy. Well, here's an example of this. I'm looking at a New York Times article of today about restoring foreign aid to Egypt. Now, the reason they're talking about restoring aid is because they've been giving aid to Egypt, the U.S. empire, for decades. I mean, like 30 years or so, billions and billions of dollars. Now, keep in mind that this is money that the IRS takes from the American people through withholding, estimated taxes, through income taxes. They forcibly take it from the American people who obviously, would have a much better use for their own money than this. But the government then takes the money and sends it to the Egyptian dictatorship. Now, notice I said dictatorship. Don't we always hear that America's pro-democracy, that the federal government is pro-democracy? Isn't that what we're taught from the first grade on up in the public schools and in the government-approved schools? That America's democracy, pro-democracy, pro-democracy. I mean, it becomes a mantra. You go and ask any school kid, 8 years old, 9 years old, you say, what does America stand for? Democracy. We're pro-democracy. And what's the purpose of the troops all over the world? Oh, we've got to be grateful for the troops because they're spreading democracy, right? I mean, that's the nonsense that they get. Now, so you've had in Egypt, however, a military dictatorship. Now, what does a military dictatorship mean? Well, it means there's no elections. It means the military is running the country. Now, when you've got a military dictatorship equals tyranny. I mean, you can't find a better example of a tyrannical regime than a military regime. Everything is done according to military rules. It's a top-down command and control system. Justice, and I put justice in quotation marks, is arbitrary. There are no civil liberties because those are considered technicalities to just let guilty people go free. You've got paranoia to the max because anytime somebody's operating outside the rules or in violation of the rules, everybody goes ape because the rules are the rules. So you got to follow the rules. And so you look at there's dictatorships that are not military dictatorships. Okay, that's tyrannical. But military dictatorships are always inevitably especially tyrannical. They round up people, they put them into military dungeons, they torture them. This is not a way of life that anybody should relish. That is life under a military dictatorship. Guess who has been supporting the military dictatorship in Egypt for decades? Yes, the U.S. empire. And knowingly supporting it, knowing that it's a brutal military dictatorship. Now, do you remember all those protests in Egypt? Where the people were risking their lives going out and protesting. Some of them got killed by the military. Well, they weren't just protesting the dictator, Hosni Mubarak. They were protesting the dictatorship. In other words, their system, their political system was a military dictatorship. Now, the military dictatorship was hoping that by offering up Mubarak, that everybody would settle down, everybody would just say, okay, the military stays in charge. That's not the case. The Egyptian people are demanding a true democracy where the people rule, they elect officials to the government, and where the military obeys what the civilian authorities are saying. That's not what's happened in Egypt. In Egypt, the military dictatorship says, we will permit you to have your parliamentary elections, and we will permit you to elect your little president and so forth. But keep in mind that the military remains in control. We are in charge. We are the foundation on which Egyptian society is based. And then you start with this foundation of the giant military establishment, and then you can go and create any little cute little system you have with elections and so forth. But we will ultimately call the shots. Well, obviously, that's not much of a democratic system. Where your dictatorship is letting people have elections, that's not really a democratic system. Now, keep in mind, the democracy doesn't necessarily mean freedom. You can have a democratically elected dictatorship where the ruler who's democratically elected has powers like to round people up and torture them and assassinate them and take away their property, cart them away to a dungeon or concentration camp. So, you can have a democratically elected dictatorship. But here you have a military dictatorship equals tyranny, which permits some elections to go on. Well, so recently, there's been a lot of, pro-democracy activity in Egypt because people don't want this military dictatorship as the ultimate control, the ultimate power. And they're saying, no, 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 no. We set up our system and you answer to us. So there's a collision here. I mean, this shows you one of the reasons why America's founding fathers warned this country against a large standing military force. Once it comes into existence, it wants to be in charge. It believes that it's in charge. Now, in Egypt, it's very fascinating because the military plays an extensive role in the economy. I mean, the military owns hotels, it runs restaurants, and nobody knows the extent of this military octopus, this economic octopus, because it's all classified. You see, national security. I mean, how you just think if people knew how extensive the military was in society. I mean, imagine what a great threat to national security that would be. A little sarcasm there. Well, ironically, the military plays just as important a role over here. Now, they don't own hotels and restaurants, but they have thousands upon thousands, we don't even know what the total is, of businesses that are dependent on the military-industrial complex, on the national security state. I mean, you've got the people that furnish the bullets and the bombs and the airplanes and the uniforms and the soft drinks and the coffee and to all this huge military-industrial complex all over the world, this empire, because there's bases all over the world. So you've got this extensive economic octopus extending throughout America, and then the suppliers of these weapon systems and the planes and so forth. What they've done is absolutely ingenious. I mean, it's as ingenious as what the Egyptian military has done. What they've done is put the manufacture of parts in different states and different congressional districts, so that if anybody ever says, well, let's get rid of this junk, they can immediately say, jobs for your community, you're going to lose jobs for your community. And then everybody in those districts, which is all over the country, gets all riled up and says, please don't cut our jobs. We need jobs. And, so it's all this sort of military largesse that extends extensively through society. Well, given the similarity in structure and in principle, it shouldn't surprise you that the militaries of both this Egyptian military dictatorship and the military here have worked closely together over the years. I mean, the military here trains Egyptian officers. I mean, so think about this. You've got a military dictatorship equals tyranny. And then you've got the military-industrial complex over here in the vast military empire training the tyrants and working with them and cooperating with them, while the U.S. empire is funneling billions and billions of dollars into this military in order for them to maintain peace and stability within Egypt. Okay? Now, what does that peace and stability mean? It means tyranny. That's the machinery that makes sure that everybody in Egypt stays down. Because as soon as they rise up and protest to what they're doing, let's say torture, because the Egyptian military regime, it shouldn't surprise you, is one of the best torturers in the world. And if somebody objects to this torture regime, the military rounds him up. He's a threat to national security. He's an enemy combatant. He's a terrorist. And they take him over to a military dungeon and they torture the heck out of him. They may even kill him as a lesson to everybody else in society. This is the way dictatorships work, including military dictatorships. Remember Iran, where the U.S. ousted the democratically elected prime minister of the country, Mohammad Mossadegh, and they installed the Shah of Iran as an unelected dictator? And the CIA then helped him train his domestic CIA. It was supposed to be like intelligence gathering, Well, it was a secret domestic police force that would round protesters up, people that would object to the dictatorship, and they would torture them and they would kill them. And they were doing so with the full support of the U.S. empire, the U.S. government, which had helped train them and continued supporting them until the Iranian people, threw them out in a violent revolution. I mean, why does it surprise anyone that the Iranian people are still angry about that? I mean, if the Iranians had done that to us, ousted the president from power and installed a dictator and then helped a secret police force to be established that tortured and abused us for 25 years, I don't think Americans would ever forget that. Well, in any event, that's the kind of system in Egypt. So recently, with all this pro-democracy activity, the U.S. starts funneling money, more taxpayer money, into a so-called pro-democracy group. Now, what they're obviously doing is, in these elections that the military is permitting them to have, the U.S. empire is trying to get its people in public office. Now, flip the tables. Imagine if, say, Iran or Venezuela were over here with organizations that were not registered and trying to get their people in public office, pro-democracy activity to get pro-Iranian people in office. I mean, U.S. officials would go ape. I mean, absolutely ape. But here they are, in Egypt, funneling money into these, quote, pro-democracy groups, which are really nothing more than groups to get their people in public office, funneling American money, influencing the elections there, and trying to get their people in. Well, the military dictatorship said, hey, wait, big boy, you're not coming in here and doing this, because some of these pro-democracy groups want to eliminate our power. We're the military-industrial complex. And so there was a collision, minor collision, but the Egyptian dictatorship, charges these American NGOs and the American officials with criminal offenses. And the criminal offenses being that they didn't register their organizations with the government. Now, keep in mind that the U.S. government has the same requirement. Okay, if you're a lobbyist for another outside group or a foreign group or whatever, you got to come and register and get your license and all this malarkey. So if you do that, if you don't do that here in this country, they will indict you and they will prosecute you within the federal criminal justice system, and they have done it. They've done it just recently. So here the Egyptian regime is saying, hey, we've got the same law here, and we're now involved in this criminal justice system. The empire says, we're not going to have anything to do with this. We don't give a hoot about your little criminal justice system. We're the empire. We are ordering you to release those Americans. And the military dictatorship says, this is the criminal justice system. What are we supposed to do? Go to the judge and say, the empire is demanding this? And the empire says, we don't care how you do it, but if you want your $1.3 billion, then you better go do it, because we're not going to funnel you this year's payment of foreign aid. Well, of course, that's got to concern a military dictatorship. That's $1.3 billion with a B. That's a lot of money. So they sit there in anguish and so forth, and finally they say, okay. Now, nobody really knows how they went over into the criminal justice system and got the judge to order these released, but it was all a charade. They let them post bail. They let them leave the country. They probably forfeit the bail. But the prosecution's still going on other NGOs there, the domestic NGOs. One American stayed, and they're prosecuting him. But in any event, the $1.3 billion, though, still wasn't forthcoming. Because you see, there's a law that says that before they can send the money to the Egyptian dictatorship, they have to certify, U.S. officials have to certify that this is a pro-freedom regime, that it's really respecting human rights and respecting freedom and so forth. Well, that's obviously a problem here, especially, the fact that it's a military dictatorship has never bothered them, and that they just keep funneling the money. But now they've got this prosecution going on, so like, how do they reconcile this? Because they're saying, well, this was freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and so forth, even though, again, they got the same requirements over here. Well, so, how do they make that certification? Did Obama want to certify that this is a pro-freedom regime? Well, no. But you see, the Secretary of State has the ability to issue a waiver of this certification requirement. I mean, this is just such garbage. I mean, it's just such garbage. So she can waive the requirement that would require her to certify that the Egyptian military dictatorship is pro-freedom. So Hillary Clinton issues the waiver just this week. And so the money can now flow to the Egyptian dictatorship. Now, why did she do that? Well, the reason is because Egypt has a contract, that the military dictatorship, to buy airplanes from Lockheed Martin here in the United States. And that money, the $1.3 billion, is going to go to the Egyptian military dictatorship and then going over to buy these airplanes and other stuff from Lockheed Martin. Well, if they didn't pay the $1.3 billion, the Egyptian military dictatorship was saying, well, we're not going to comply with the contract to buy those airplanes. And of course, Lockheed Martin starts freaking out, and all the people start freaking out to supply the parts, which are spread all over the United States. And they say, well, if you do this, if Lockheed Martin has to shut down this assembly line, there's going to be penalties and there's going to be job loss. And so Obama, who's running as job creator in chief, right? He didn't want to be accused of losing jobs for Americans, you know? So they issue this waiver. I mean, this is absolutely incredible. This is a tyranny military dictatorship. And it shows you everything wrong with the military-industrial complex. But they really don't see anything wrong with it fundamentally. Here's what the Times says. A State Department spokesman, Victoria Nuland, said this in a statement. The Secretary's decision to waive is also designed to demonstrate our strong support for Egypt's enduring role as a security partner and leader in promoting regional stability and peace. You see, they love dictatorships because they provide order and stability. In fact, it's not surprised that the U.S. war on terrorism is now based in large part on the powers that this military dictatorship in Egypt now has exercised for decades under the concept of emergency. Okay, now remember, we live under an emergency too. We have ever since 1945, the emergency state, the communist threat, the terrorist threat, the rogue state threat, the drug dealer threat. That's what they've done in Egypt. And they have, the dictatorship has had the power to round people up, to call them enemy combatants in the war on terrorism, to protect against the communist threat, to torture people, to execute people. In other words, the same, assassinate people, the same powers that the U.S. government now wields through its military, through its CIA, against the American people and against foreigners. So you've got this commonality of mindset of the two regimes, which should be no surprise as to why they've partnered together and worked together for so many years. In fact, do you recall that man that the CIA kidnapped in Italy? Well, they kidnapped this guy and they renditioned him to Egypt. Now, why Egypt? Well, because Egypt's good at torturing people. And the CIA knew this. I mean, they've worked together for, decades. So they go to their partner and say, would you guys torture this guy for us? And of course, never mind that in Italy, kidnapping is considered a criminal offense, and they indicted these CIA agents. They convicted them. Not that the CIA agents stuck around. They vamoosed out of there as fast as the Americans vamoosed out of Egypt when that bond was posted. But they got convicted anyway. And of course, they're not going back to face the music, and Obama's not sending them back, even though they're felons. They're criminal felons. They're kidnappers. They're no different from any other kidnapper. The only difference is they do it in the so-called name of national security. Another part of this glorious militarist, national security state foreign policy. Well, okay, so they partner with Egypt to torture people. I mean, they work with Egypt to maintain order and stability. And guess where the order and stability is imposed? Yeah, against the Egyptian people. That's where this weaponry will go for. This now, what incentive do the Egyptian people, the protesters, have to take on this military dictatorship that is so well armed, armed complements of the U.S. empire? And can you imagine $1.3 billion in armaments? And here's what Lockheed Martin says. I mean, this is incredible. Lockheed Martin values the relationship established between our company and the Egyptian customer since the first F-16s were delivered in the early 1980s. There you have it. They value their customer. They don't mention that their customer is a military dictatorship, a tyrannical military dictatorship that brutalizes and oppresses the Egyptian people, and has for decades. And how does that military dictatorship do this? With weaponry. I mean, that's the whole idea of a strong, powerful military dictatorship. Weaponry that it can use to intimidate people, to keep people down. I mean, this is where this country has come with this pro-empire, pro-interventionist, national security state foreign policy, supporting dictatorships, teaching children in American public schools that it's all pro-democracy, that it's all just loving democracy. Nonsense. It's about hegemony. It's about control. It's about getting their people in public office that'll follow their orders. When they say release somebody from your criminal justice system, you got to do it, or you lose the money, or we're going to sanction you or embargo you or whatever. This is the kind of thing that we need to abandon, to reject. Now that they've gotten out of Iraq after killing who knows how many people there, it's incredible. Not one single Iraqi person that they killed or maimed or tortured at Abu Ghraib or anywhere else had anything to do with 9/11. And they say, oh, but yeah, it's worth it because they brought democracy. They may have elections in Iraq, but it is the most brutal dictatorship you can imagine. It is the perfect example of a democratically elected dictatorship. And everywhere you look, there in Iraq is all the characteristics of dictatorship. Torture, roundups, indefinite incarceration, no due process of law, arbitrary incarceration of people. I mean, it's horrendous. How many Americans do you know are going on vacation there? Even the guards in the embassy, people can't even leave the embassy because they're so scared of getting, something bad happening to them, killed or maimed or whatever. And in Afghanistan, I mean, there you've got this dictatorship. It's not even elected. A fraudulent election where there's stuff in the ballot box. That's not an election. So you've got this crooked, corrupt regime that's corrupting the troops. I mean, the troops are figuring it out that this is just garbage. Well, ultimately they're going to have to pull out of Afghanistan too, and we've got to be preparing for this, because conservatives are going to say, keep the empire, keep the large military. The same thing they did after the fall of the Soviet Union. They used to say, well, the only reason we support big government in the military and foreign policy is because of communist threat. The communists are coming to get us. Well, we always said bull. The conservatives love big government. They just like to talk like libertarians. It's sort of like Romney's now about economic freedom. I want to talk like a libertarian. Well, he supports every socialist program from Social Security to Medicare to Medicaid all the way down the line. Well, we libertarians have the answer to this, and this is why we've got to continue talking, spreading the idea. As things get worse and worse and worse with this pro-empire foreign policy, and they start bringing the troops, we've got to get this national debate continuing about dismantling the national security state, bringing all the troops home. Europe, Cold War's over, hello, Korea, Asia, Africa, South America. Get rid of the drug war. Get the military out of the drug war. Well, if you get rid of the drug war, you get the military out of it. But dismantle the national security state. Dismantle these domestic bases, all the weapons systems that go into the national military industrial complex, and restore the money to the American people who are paying for all this through our hard-earned taxes to the IRS. I mean, imagine if all that money that goes into this military welfare, destructive welfare, were back in the private sector in forms of productive capital. That's the key to rising standards of living. It's the key to harmony with the world. I mean, we libertarians just have it right. mean, we've got the right domestic policies in terms of wealth creation and helping the poor. And then we've got the right foreign policy with respect to dismantling the militarism and the wars of aggression and the assassinations, restoring the principles of a limited government constitutional republic, the kind that our ancestors bequeathed to us and that the statists took away from us. That we've got to raise people's vision, not to reforming the military, not to reducing the military budget by 5% or the rate of growth by 2% or whatever, but a whole new paradigm of a constitutional republic to our land. That's the key to peace and harmony and economic stability and economic prosperity and freedom. That's the key to a free society. That's the show. Thanks so much for listening in, and look forward to seeing you all next week. Thanks so much. Have a nice rest of the weekend.